So Durga, can't help but talk about the Patanjali impact across all categories, especially oral care, and of course a few other key segments. Do you feel the market is big enough to accommodate everybody? Because if you just look at volumes, they spin a different tale.
Patanjali is a very interesting reference because the Patanjali impact really happened when the consumption stress was at the highest. So obviously, whatever share they took over from other players, including us. The impact would have been far less had the categories' growth been reasonably good as what they are today. Because the market size is so big, it can accommodate not just one but many Patanjalis. The other positive aspect of Patanjali is it's unveiled the fact that there is a far larger market for Ayurvedic products and traditional Indian products than perhaps was envisaged earlier.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of category expansion which has been done and a lot of recruitment which has been done from both non-users as well as users of the regular products into Ayurveda. And I think that augurs very well for us because the recruitment is very hard. And so therefore we can gain out of that. We see a bright future post the expansion of the whole Ayurvedic space for companies like ours. Perhaps nobody's better positioned to take advantage of that.
Mr. Dukal, you've been one of the longest standing CEOs in the FMCG space. So you've seen a lot of players come and go. However, having said that, you must agree that we live in very different times today. So for instance, you also have competition. You've always had competition and severe competition, but you've never had unruly competition. And with the emergence of homegrown unruly competition, where they are not followed by any communication diktats or rules or procedures, and companies such as yours and others have some protocols to follow. Don't you think that some way leaves you a bit disadvantaged because you're not designed to communicate, whether it is to the consumers or via your ads or to the media, in this guerrilla warfare of communication. So do you think maybe it is time, and I don't know, I'm just speaking out, to internalize for companies such as yours and many others who are today subject to such attacks, to change the way you communicate?
No, we will not change the tonality. We will not do what other people are doing. But fortunately for us, there is a legal framework here. And if somebody is crossing the line in terms of communication,
and you will move the court.
We move the courts, and we've done it. Not just us, but
everybody.
Many other companies.
I agree, but don't you think the damage is done? You can move the court, and you can win the case, and the ads may be withdrawn. But don't you think at some level the basic communication which has hit the consumer, the message has been delivered?
My own experience in 30 years of marketing is that if the tonality of the communication is wrong, the consumer does not buy into it. In fact, that is a negative impact in terms of the brand performance. We've never indulged in that, and it's not that because of any holier than thou attitude, but simply in India, very harsh competitive advertisements tend not to work, especially when there's no substance behind it. Now, somebody can say, I'm cheaper than yours, and that can strike a chord, because that's a very clear. But if somebody says that you're wrong because of reasons which the consumer cannot decipher, that communication doesn't work. But at the same time, I think to send a message, we do make sure that the communication is not aired, because it's outside the framework of the law. Even if we let it run, quite frankly, it won't damage us.
In terms of your international business, about 30% of your business comes from international markets. But we've seen some pain points there as well. We've heard that a lot of players who are also present in the Middle East market have claimed that they see the Middle East market bottoming out. Is that good experience in your view too?
Yes, there's still pockets of pain, but the key market, which is Saudi Arabia, which is half of the MENA consumption, or at least the Gulf consumption, is now bottoming out for sure and is now on a recovery path. How strong the recovery is still remains to be seen, but definitely we saw the bottom perhaps in the last quarter or the quarter before that. In other markets, our problems were largely on account of currency, not on account of the underlying demand. For example, Egypt, which is perhaps our second biggest market overseas, we've seen growth in the region of 30-35%. but all of it in the Egyptian pound, which has depreciated by half vis-a-vis the Indian rupee or the dollar. So therefore, whatever you gain in terms of local growth, you lose in terms of translation. The good thing is that we are beginning now to anniversarize the devaluation of many of the currencies, the Turkish lira, Egyptian pound, Nigerian naira, etc., etc. And if the currencies remain stable now, which they show every signs of doing, then we should see strong growth coming back from the third quarter and definitely from the fourth quarter, because the currency devaluation would be anniversarized. But there will be still some damage in terms of margins, which we can rebuild over the next 1 or 2 years.
Okay.
So I think the international business, which perhaps was even more impacted than the domestic business because of macros, you can't do anything about currency devaluations. You just got to ride them out. Has now begun the growth phase. Certainly from the third quarter, you would see growth, and I suspect the growth in international business would be even stronger than that of the domestic.
If I may ask you, what are your three biggest markets, 1, 2, 3, in that order, in when we talk of your international business?
Well, if you take inorganic and organic, then the US would be our biggest market, followed by now Egypt in the local currency, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia almost neck to neck.
Are your margins better in your international business than your
At this point in time, no. They are marginally lower than the domestic business, but structurally they're higher.
They should be.
And I think next year they will once again be higher than the domestic business.
So, would it be a focus to then increase substantially your international play and make this 70-30 skew change in the coming years?
I'll tell you how we design our domestic and international strategies. The two businesses are substantially siloed. Only a few people like me oversee the entire global business. Otherwise, operationally, they're very independent. Financially, we don't move a single rupee of money from India overseas. And that's been something which we have hardwired as part of our DNA over the last 20 years. So the international business will grow on the back of its own momentum, its own free cash flows, and its own strategies. And we will, of course, encourage them and guide them in that process, but don't ask us for money, don't ask India for money. That's a caveat which we have, and they respect that. So therefore, they will grow according to their own resourcing, and I think that is the way they should, because you have to sort of sink and swim. So, and they're smart enough people there to have a growth which would be substantial. Whether it will be ahead of the India business depends upon the level of M&A activity which happens. Because M&A opportunities are obviously far more overseas than in India.
Sure.
At the same time, the risk associated with M&A is far higher overseas as compared to India. So both India and overseas will pursue M&A opportunities, and perhaps the growth rate would be higher or lower depending upon the outcome of those initiatives.
You don't have ambitions of Dabur becoming, this international brand.
No, it will become a brand which is in select geographies.
Okay.
So it won't be known from Argentina to Australia. But in the MENA region, in the greater MENA region, which includes Turkey, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the SAARC areas, and perhaps in East Asia, we should be a household name. That's very important. But we are not a developed market entity, and we don't have any ambitions to become one. Maybe that will happen many years in the future, but not in the near-term horizon.
Would I be right to assume that Africa in your international play will be your biggest focus, given that you've just finished 2 acquisitions, which are pretty significant? And if we just look at your acquisitions and your current business play going forward, it looks like it should show as much potential as the North American market.
Well, Africa, obviously the headroom is huge. That's why everybody has gone to Africa, because the consumption density is so low and the potential for growth is so high that it's a very attractive price. But I think most companies who have gone into Africa have actually not benefited by that.
That's true.
So you've got to be very careful. And I think our learnings have been that you should invest in Africa, but be very clear-eyed about the investments and be very clear-eyed about the underlying risks of those investments. And keep the ticket size low. Don't spend a fortune in Africa. So I would do small acquisitions with limited downsides and big upsides, rather than buy a company of $500 million there, which could prove very toxic if the macro issues turn against us.
Any new market entries that you're planning?
East Asia, I think. Myanmar is again a big price, and we are investing in Myanmar. And looking forward, I would not rule out doing business in ASEAN. I think ASEAN has opportunities. It's reasonably aligned with South Asia in terms of consumption habits, unlike the Far East, which is a very different ecosystem. So there are potential there.
Mr. Dugal, you've been the CEO of Dabur since 2002, and one of the big reasons for Dabur's stability and its performance, and almost synonymous with the Dabur staple. Having said that, one is wondering who is going to fill your big shoes when it comes to finding your successor.
Well, somebody having bigger shoes, I suppose. But I think to answer your question, succession is critically important. Perhaps it's the most important part of my job as we speak. It's very important in the context of Dabur to look at internal succession rather than external person being inducted. And we began that process, 3 years ago. We put it on a little bit of pause mode so that the headwinds which we saw in the last 2 years could be navigated by me at the helm. Because putting somebody new into this kind of situation may not have been good for the business. We've now resurrected the whole succession process in terms of identification of the people, doing extensive mentoring and grooming of those, putting them into different areas from where they have been working, and then seeing who's the best performer. So it's not that we have a designated successor, we have more than one. And let's say the next 2 years, we should have complete clarity as to who is the right person for the job. And I'm sure one of those persons would definitely fill my shoes and perhaps enlarge the space which I have created.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. Very enlightening talking to you, Mr. Dugal, and all the very best for Dabur's journey.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you.